A gym bro tried to publicly humiliate a quiet high school teacher, not knowing I'd spent 15 years training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. My name is Marcus, I'm 38 years old, and I work as a high school history teacher in Portland, Oregon. I live a fairly quiet life, and most people who know me would describe me as mild-mannered, soft-spoken, and probably a bit nerdy. I wear glasses, I dress conservatively, and I tend to keep to myself outside of work. What most people don't know about me is that I spent 15 years training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and mixed martial arts, earning my black belt and competing at a fairly high level before I decided to step back from competition and focus on teaching. That hidden part of my life became very relevant one evening when someone decided to challenge me in front of a crowd of people who had no idea what I was capable of. The incident happened at a community fundraiser event that our school was hosting. It was one of those family-friendly affairs with food trucks, games for kids, and various activities designed to raise money for new sports equipment and art supplies. As a teacher, I was expected to attend and help out, so I'd volunteered to work at one of the game booths for a few hours. The event was well attended, with hundreds of people from the community milling around, including current students, parents, other teachers, and various local residents. Among the attendees was a man I'd never met before named Travis. He was there with his girlfriend, who I recognized as the sister of one of my students. Travis was probably in his early 30s, muscular and fit in an obvious way, wearing a tank top that showed off his physique. He had that kind of aggressive confidence that some gym-focused guys develop, the kind that makes them look for opportunities to demonstrate their physical superiority. I first noticed Travis when he was at the strength test game, one of those carnival attractions where you hit a pad with a mallet and try to ring the bell at the top. He was making a big show of it, flexing and getting people to watch before he swung. He rang the bell easily and then walked around for a while afterward like he'd accomplished something remarkable, accepting congratulations from people who were probably just being polite. Later in the evening, I was taking a break from my booth duties and getting some food from one of the food trucks. I was standing in line, minding my own business and checking my phone, when I felt someone bump into me from behind. It was hard enough that I had to take a step forward to keep my balance. I turned around and saw Travis standing there with a smirk on his face. He didn't apologize. Instead, he looked me up and down with obvious disdain and made some comment about how I should watch where I was standing. It was clearly his fault for bumping into me, but he was trying to turn it around as if I'd been in his way. I just nodded and turned back around, not interested in engaging with someone who was obviously looking for confrontation. But Travis wasn't done. He said something to his girlfriend loud enough for me and others nearby to hear about how some people didn't know how to handle themselves in public spaces. His girlfriend looked embarrassed and tried to quiet him down, but he ignored her. I continued to ignore him as well, got my food, and walked away to find a quiet spot to eat. I thought that would be the end of it, but about 20 minutes later, I was walking past the area where some people had set up an impromptu volleyball game. Travis was there with a group of people, and as I walked by, he called out to me. He said something like, "Hey, glasses, you look like you could use some exercise. Come play volleyball with us." The way he said it wasn't friendly or inviting. It was mocking, designed to draw attention to what he perceived as my physical inadequacy. I politely declined, saying I needed to get back to my booth duties. But Travis persisted, getting louder and more insistent. He said that I probably didn't know how to play sports, that I looked like the type who'd spent my whole life with my nose in books. Some people in the crowd started paying attention to the interaction, sensing the tension in Travis's tone. I remained calm and just repeated that I needed to get back to work. But then Travis made it worse. He walked over to me, got close enough that I could smell the beer on his breath, and said that he bet I couldn't do a single pull-up. He pointed to the playground equipment nearby, which had a pull-up bar, and challenged me to prove I wasn't as weak as I looked. At this point, we had a small crowd watching the interaction. I recognized several of my students and their parents, some colleagues, and various community members. I felt embarrassed and annoyed, but I also knew that engaging with Travis would just escalate the situation. I tried once more to politely excuse myself, but Travis put his hand on my shoulder to stop me from walking away. That physical contact changed the dynamic. In my years of martial arts training, I'd learned to read situations and to understand when someone was genuinely threatening versus just posturing. Travis was crossing the line from posturing to actual aggression. His hand on my shoulder was firm, preventing me from leaving, and his body language suggested he was prepared to escalate further if I tried to walk away. I looked at his hand on my shoulder and then at his face. I said calmly and clearly that he needed to remove his hand. Travis laughed and said, "Or what, you'll bore me to death talking about history." Some people in the crowd laughed at that, which seemed to embolden him. He pushed down slightly on my shoulder, enough to make me dip a few inches, and asked again if I was going to take his challenge or if I was too scared. I'd spent 15 years in environments where ego and machismo could get you hurt if you didn't know how to manage them. I'd trained with people who were genuinely dangerous, who could end a confrontation in seconds if they wanted to. Travis was not one of those people. His stance was all wrong, his weight distribution was off, and despite his obvious gym muscles, he moved like someone who'd never been in an actual physical confrontation. I made a decision in that moment. I could continue trying to de-escalate and walk away, which might work but might also encourage Travis to keep pushing. Or I could accept his challenge in a way that would definitively end his harassment without actually hurting him. I chose the latter. I told Travis that I'd accept his challenge, but not the pull-up challenge. That seemed pointless and wouldn't prove anything. Instead, I said that if he really wanted to test physical ability, we could do something more meaningful. I asked if he'd ever done any grappling or martial arts training. He scoffed and said he'd taken a few boxing classes and could handle himself. I suggested that we could do a friendly grappling match, just basic wrestling with no striking, first person to submit or get pinned loses. Travis seemed surprised by the suggestion but quickly agreed, clearly confident that his size and strength advantage would make it an easy win. His girlfriend tried to talk him out of it, saying it was stupid and unnecessary, but he waved her off. Some of the people in the crowd seemed uncomfortable with where this was heading, but others were clearly interested in seeing what would happen. We cleared a space on the grass near the volleyball area. I took off my glasses and handed them to one of my colleagues who was watching with a concerned expression. I could see her starting to say something, probably to try to stop this from happening, but I gave her a small shake of my head to indicate it was okay. Travis and I stood facing each other, and I explained the basic rules. We'd start from standing, and we could use any grappling techniques to try to get the other person to submit or to pin them for a count of 3. No striking, no eye gouging, no groin strikes, just pure grappling. Travis agreed impatiently, clearly eager to get started and prove his dominance. I'd been in this exact scenario hundreds of times over my 15 years of training. The confident, muscular guy with no real technique who thinks size and strength are all that matter in a physical confrontation. I knew within the first 3 seconds exactly how this would go. We started, and Travis immediately lunged forward trying to grab me in a bear hug. It was the most predictable move possible, relying entirely on strength with no technique. I sidestepped easily, used his momentum against him, and before he even realized what was happening, I'd secured a basic arm drag that put me behind him with control of his upper body. Travis tried to muscle his way out of the position, which is what untrained people always do. They rely on strength instead of technique, which just makes them tire faster and gives their opponent more opportunities. I transitioned smoothly to his back, got my hooks in, and within maybe 10 seconds of the match starting, I had him in a rear naked choke. I didn't apply the choke fully. I just positioned it correctly and held him there, letting him feel the control and understand that if I wanted to, I could put him to sleep in about 5 seconds. I could feel him trying desperately to break my grip, using all his strength to pry my arm away from his neck, but proper technique beats strength every time when there's this much disparity in skill level. I leaned close to his ear and quietly told him that he could either tap out now and we could call this done, or I could tighten the choke and he'd go to sleep in front of all these people. He hesitated for a moment, his pride clearly warring with his survival instinct, but then he tapped my arm 3 times in rapid succession. I immediately released the choke and stepped back. The whole exchange had lasted maybe 15 seconds from start to finish. Travis got up, his face red from exertion and embarrassment, and the crowd was completely silent. Nobody seemed to know quite what to say or how to react. Travis's girlfriend looked mortified. Some of my students were staring at me with expressions of shock and newfound respect. Travis, to his credit, didn't try to make excuses or demand a rematch. He just muttered something about needing to leave and walked away with his girlfriend trailing behind him, trying to keep up with his angry stride. The crowd slowly dispersed, with people going back to their activities but clearly processing what they just witnessed. Several of my colleagues came over to talk to me, some expressing surprise at what had just happened, others asking questions about my background. I explained briefly that I'd trained in martial arts for many years before becoming a teacher. One of my fellow teachers, a woman named Sarah who I'd worked with for 5 years, said she'd had no idea and seemed almost betrayed that I'd never mentioned it. Over the next hour, as I returned to my booth duties and tried to act normal, various students and parents came by to talk to me. Some of the students thought what happened was amazing and wanted to know if I could teach them some moves. Some of the parents seemed concerned, questioning whether it was appropriate for a teacher to get into a physical confrontation at a school event, even if I'd been defending myself from harassment. The principal, Mr. Davidson, pulled me aside near the end of the event and asked for my version of what happened. I explained the situation from beginning to end, emphasizing that I'd tried to de-escalate multiple times and had only engaged physically when Travis put his hands on me and prevented me from leaving. Mr. Davidson listened carefully and said he understood, but that he'd need to include the incident in his event report and that we might need to discuss it further. That conversation made me anxious. I started worrying that I'd made a terrible mistake, that defending myself might somehow be seen as inappropriate conduct for a teacher, that my career might be impacted by this one moment of deciding to stand up to a bully rather than just walking away and reporting him to event security. In the days following the event, the incident became the talk of the school. Students who'd been there told students who hadn't, and the story grew in the telling, becoming more dramatic and exaggerated with each retelling. By the time it made the rounds, some versions had me beating up multiple attackers or performing some kind of ninja moves that bore no resemblance to the simple grappling exchange that actually occurred. I had a formal meeting with Mr. Davidson and the school district's HR representative about a week after the event. They asked detailed questions about my martial arts background, why I'd never mentioned it before, and whether I thought my response to Travis had been proportionate and appropriate. I answered honestly, explaining that I'd trained for many years but had never seen it as relevant to my job as a history teacher, and that I'd only engaged with Travis after he'd physically prevented me from leaving a situation I'd tried repeatedly to de-escalate. The HR representative reviewed statements from several witnesses who'd seen the interaction, and all of them supported my version of events. They confirmed that Travis had been the aggressor, that I'd tried to walk away multiple times, and that Travis had initiated physical contact. The actual grappling match had been consensual, with both parties agreeing to the terms, and I hadn't injured Travis or used excessive force. After reviewing everything, Mr. Davidson said that while he wished the situation hadn't happened, he understood that I'd handled it appropriately under the circumstances. He said there would be no disciplinary action, but he suggested that going forward, I should immediately contact event security or staff if someone was harassing me rather than handling it myself, even if I had the skills to do so. I agreed with that recommendation, though I also pointed out that in the moment, with Travis physically restraining me and a crowd watching, going to find security hadn't seemed like a viable option. Mr. Davidson acknowledged that point and said he understood the complexity of the situation. The incident changed how people at school viewed me. Some students seemed to respect me more, seeing me as someone who could handle himself rather than just a bookish teacher. Other students seemed slightly intimidated, as if they thought I might suddenly put them in a chokehold if they misbehaved in class. Some of my colleagues started asking me about my martial arts background, wanting to hear stories from my competition days or asking why I'd never mentioned it before. The truth is, I deliberately kept that part of my life separate from my teaching career. I'd worried that if students and parents knew I had extensive training in combat sports, they might view me as aggressive or threatening. I'd wanted to be seen as an educator, not as a fighter. But now that separation had been forcibly removed, and I had to navigate this new reality where people knew about my background. Interestingly, the incident also opened up some positive opportunities. The school's wrestling coach approached me about helping out with the team, offering technical advice based on my grappling experience. Some students who were interested in martial arts started coming to me for recommendations on where to train and what style might be right for them. I found myself having conversations about discipline, respect, and the mental aspects of martial arts training that were actually quite rewarding. About a month after the incident, I ran into Travis's girlfriend at a coffee shop. She recognized me and came over to apologize for Travis's behavior at the fundraiser. She said they'd broken up shortly after that night, partly because of how he'd acted and how embarrassed she'd been by the whole situation. She said Travis had apparently learned a lesson from the experience and had actually started training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu himself, hoping to develop real skills rather than just relying on gym muscles and bravado. I appreciated her telling me that. It suggested that maybe the confrontation had actually served a positive purpose, teaching Travis some humility and pointing him toward training that might help him develop better character along with physical skills. That's one of the things I'd always loved about martial arts training. It has a way of humbling people and teaching them that there's always someone better, someone who can expose the gaps in your knowledge and skills. Looking back on the incident now, several months later, I have mixed feelings about how I handled it. On one hand, I demonstrated that I wouldn't be bullied or intimidated, and I dealt with the situation in a controlled way that didn't actually harm Travis despite easily being able to do so. On the other hand, I sometimes wonder if I should have tried harder to find another way to de-escalate, if my pride or ego played a role in my decision to accept the challenge rather than continuing to walk away. My years of martial arts training taught me many things, not just physical techniques but also lessons about ego, conflict, and when to engage versus when to avoid confrontation. One of the core principles I learned was that the best fight is the one you never have, that true strength includes the strength to walk away from provocation. By that standard, maybe I failed the real test by engaging with Travis at all. But I also learned that sometimes you can't avoid conflict, that sometimes someone forces it upon you, and in those moments, having skills and confidence can mean the difference between being victimized and standing your ground. Travis created a situation where I had limited options, where walking away had already failed and where his physical restraint of me demanded some kind of response. The incident reminded me why I'd spent 15 years training in the first place. It wasn't about looking tough or proving myself to others. It was about having the skills and confidence to protect myself if needed, about understanding how physical confrontations work and how to manage them effectively. Those skills are like insurance, you hope you never need them, but when you do, you're glad they're there. He challenged me in front of everyone, expecting an easy victory over someone he perceived as weak and unworthy of respect. He didn't know I'd spent 15 years training with some of the best grapplers and fighters in the region. He didn't know that behind my glasses and teacher clothes was someone who'd competed at a high level and earned a black belt through years of dedication. His ignorance of my background led him to make a mistake, and that mistake taught both of us important lessons about assumptions, humility, and the danger of judging people by their appearance.